Hey guys, today something a bit different. We are testing whether the Sony ZV1 right here or the iPhone 12 right here is a superior option for inexpensive but high quality vlogs, YouTube videos, that kind of thing.
But before we start, a few basics on what I'm showing you and what we're going to cover. The video is going to be mostly vlogging test footage, but I will cut in like this from time to time with thoughts and tips. The audio in all of the footage will be from either the iPhone or the ZV1. Watch out in the bottom right corner if you want to see which at any given point in time. We are going to cover image quality, stabilization, field of view, autofocus, low light performance, blurry background bokeh, and stick around until the end for my overall thoughts and conclusions. More thoughts later, but for now, back to the test footage.
Right now, both are set to fully automatic, so we're going to see how good they are at exposing correctly to pick me up. See how the image quality is. The stabilization is going to be interesting. It's set to active right now on the ZV1. How are they both coping with these conditions? Today in the UK, it is, I believe the technical term is cold AF. And the sky is not overexposed. The sky is literally white, grey. I live pretty close to the River Thames, so there's a huge amount of fog and mist. How's the built-in audio going to be? This is example audio on the iPhone 12. And this is example audio on the Sony ZV1. How will they cope with dangerous situations like a car in the park? See this? This insane man, he's trying to kill me. I don't blame him, but it's not very nice either way.
There are three things I wanted to point out here. Number one, audio. Ideally, I recommend a dedicated mic, either a shotgun mic or a lav mic, to improve the quality and remove some of the ambient background noise. However, I think the onboard mics of both the ZV1 and the iPhone give you very usable results. Let me know in the comments which you prefer. 2, colors. Now, I'm no expert at color grading, but what I have tried to do is to make both devices match each other after color grading and to try and replicate the beautiful autumn colors that I was seeing in real life. Here is the ZV1 footage before and after color grading. I really like the colors straight out of the camera here, so all I've done is added a little bit of contrast and toned down a little bit of exposure to closer match what I was seeing in reality. And here is the iPhone before and after color grading. I actually don't like the colors straight out of the iPhone as much. Everything is just a little too bright and the skin tones are a little bit off. It grades just fine and I'm happy with the results after that, but I do prefer the colors straight out of camera with the ZV1. 3, field of view is definitely wider with the iPhone rear camera and the other cameras, as we will get to later on. The ZV1 angle is definitely tighter. I don't think it's a huge problem or unworkable for vlogging, but be aware this is the kind of view you're going to get if you're filming in 4K with active stabilization like we were here. Speaking of stabilization, more on that now.
Right now, it's the age of social distancing, which is actually great for tests like this. Because the more bizarre I look and the stranger my tests are, the further away people are likely to keep, and the more I am a shining example of upholding the rules. So in that spirit, let's do a little spin. See how they cope with that. 360. Yeah, I remember the extreme sports words. Get a better grip, and let's do a little run, which I'll be interested to see how the iPhone does. I'm assuming even with active stab on the Sony it's going to be pretty disastrous, but let's find out. This whole time we've been using the main rear camera on the iPhone, which should, I think, be the highest quality image and the fairest to compare with the dedicated camera like the ZV1. But let's try the front-facing camera, because obviously being able to see yourself is pretty damn advantageous when you're vlogging. So how do they compare? I like the fact that with the front-facing camera on the iPhone you can actually see yourself, your shot composition. But how does it do for quality compared to the rear cam and the ZV1? Also, is there any noticeable difference in terms of audio? The phone is physically orientated differently. Is it going to make much of a difference? Okay, so autofocus test number 1 is going to be based off the documentary known as Dodgeball. So I'm going to try to duck, dodge, dip, dive and dodge around the frame and see how the two cameras perform in terms of autofocus. What about if I were to do this and come back? How quickly are they picking me up? What about if I turn around, drift out of frame, and then return? Or if the world goes crazy, and then here I am again. How about if the entire composition becomes about how tremendously interesting this bush is? It's no George W. or Kate, but it's still a good bush. So now we are going to compare gyroscopic stabilization. It's built in on the iPhone, and it's an extra capability on the ZV1. The ZV1 records gyroscopic data, and then you can use a free software called Catalyst Browse to then stabilize in post-production. To try and do the fairest test and get the best results, I have turned the stabilization in the Sony to standard mode rather than active. Basically, active mode crops into the image, and so does Catalyst Browse. So we want to have a wider starting point so that when it crops in, we still have an okay angle. Birds. Action shot. Man, I'm in a Hitchcock movie.
I was not in an Alfred Hitchcock movie, as it turns out, but some of those pigeons definitely seemed kinda suspicious. Anyway, a few more observations. As we cover more later, the ZV1 does have more separation between the in-focus subject and the blurry background, which makes the focus more immediately apparent. But even frame-by-frame review of this footage showed both devices getting me back in focus pretty much immediately after I entered the frame. Really impressive. The iPhone's front camera is not as good as the main rear camera. You lose some detail, some crispness, but I think it's still decent and certainly usable. A big drawback of using the rear iPhone camera is not being able to see yourself, so you can't check the shot composition, the exposure, whether you're even correctly in the frame. Using the front camera on the iPhone helps to mitigate this, and for the ZV1 it's not a problem, thanks to the awesome flip out screen. iPhone stabilization is generally smoother than the ZV1, but not by the margin that I expected. And the ZV1 outperformed my expectations, even in the running test. ZV1 with active steady shot is definitely usable, especially if you make more effort to move smoothly than I did. FYI, I made zero effort to move smoothly. Both devices were attached to my little improvised mounting rig, which may have also helped a little bit with smoothness. It's worth emphasizing the ZV1 can do gyroscopic stabilization thanks to Catalyst Browse software in post-production, with really decent results. Deep dive on that, linked in the description. Last thing to point out, I noticed a bit of flickering in some of the iPhone footage, mostly where you had lots of white, misty colors washed out in the background. I suspect this is either auto HDR mode or auto exposure trying to calibrate for the tricky conditions, and maybe fixing exposure or turning off HDR would fix it. But as it stands, it's definitely an advantage for the ZV1 for image quality. Before we get to the final 3 tests and conclusions, thank you so much for watching the video so far. If it ends up being interesting or useful, please consider dropping a like, a subscription, and of course ask any questions or share your opinions in the comments. Thank you. Now back to the vlog, where we are going to look at wide angle options, low light performance, and blurry background bokeh.
Okay, so now we are testing the wide angle lens of the iPhone, which is built in. And to try and make an even comparison, I've added an inexpensive wide-angle lens to the Sony ZV1. One of the common criticisms of the ZV1 is the comparatively tight angle of view. So I made a video on how you can inexpensively and easily add a wide-angle lens like this one. Okay, now we're testing the main front camera on the iPhone, and again the ZV1 in aperture priority mode. And once again, iPhone versus ZV1. We are in aperture priority mode. This time no wide angle lens and active stabilization. How about that blurry background vibe?
I didn't speak over most of this night footage because I didn't know if it was going to be usable, and I ended up being pleasantly surprised. Initially, I set focus and ISO manually for the ZV1 because I wanted to see how it would do at lower ISO settings. Thanks to that, the iPhone initially nailed better focus, with the ZV1 being a little soft, but I prefer the ZV1 in every other way. With better manual focus on the ZV1, shooting at 1000, 500, and even 200 ISO, the lowest you can use in the HLG picture profile. I really like the results. Moody, cinematic, with great colors and a gorgeous blur on the lights in the background. The iPhone suffers from color distortion and a noisier image, as you might expect from a much smaller sensor, but the footage differences just are huge. The front iPhone camera performs significantly worse and is borderline unusable. At this point, the comparison is particularly unfair because I switched the ZV1 to auto settings just to see how it would perform. The ISO got boosted a lot higher than where I was using it, but the results look good, and as the ISO crept up, the autofocus returned to the ZV1 and started performing really well again. The iPhone ultra-wide camera performed better than the front, but worse than the main rear camera, as you might expect, and I'd say it's probably unusable in low light. As for the other tests earlier in this section of footage, when it comes to depth of field, subject separation, background, bokeh, whatever you'd like to call it, the ZV1 significantly outperforms the iPhone both in day and night conditions. The ultra-wide camera on the iPhone is actually a pretty cool option in good lighting. Quality is solid and the view is far wider than anything you can achieve on the ZV1, even with a wide-angle adapter. For my taste, it's a bit too wide for normal vlogging, but could be really cool for situations where you have particularly interesting surroundings. Which brings us to the conclusions. Honestly, either device will give you pretty good quality vlogging results. Smartphone video in general has really evolved in the past decade, and the iPhone remains at the very top end of capability in that market. Plus, a phone is way more multifunctional, so offers much better value if you want to minimize spend. You get 3 distinct camera options with different benefits and weaknesses, great stabilisation, and really nice image quality, especially on that main rear camera sensor. But I prefer the ZV1. And I think it could be a great option for you if, like me, you care about that superior image quality, the beautiful bokeh background blur, more pleasant colors straight out of camera, convenient flip-out screen, and far better low-light performance. If you're prepared to buy something additional to get that extra jump in quality, you want a first proper camera, you want something that you can learn the concept of videography on while still getting great results as you learn just using the auto settings, or you want to use a device that lets you disconnect away from your smartphone and stop staring at the same screen and the same notifications, then the ZV1 could be an excellent choice for you. So those are my conclusions and we are done. A huge thank you for watching all the way to the end of the video. If it entertained or informed, then please consider liking, subscribing, sharing, commenting. All help me out, all are much appreciated. So until next time, take it easy.